We always hear complaints in the media from veterans and comments from politicians on both sides of the aisle about the shortcomings of the VA department. Everyone thinks they have the know-how to make it better. Meanwhile, we all see veterans suffering. Somehow neither political party nor any recent administration seems to have been able to make any real progress over the last 20 years to resolve the issues plaguing the VA. Why is the process so long, you might ask? Why is there so much paperwork? Why all the red tape, for lack of a better term? Not unlike many other of our government agencies and entities, the VA has grown and grown. They increasingly ask for large percentages of additional monies each year and are influenced by lobby groups and private sector equipment and supply companies. Bureaucracy at its finest, if you will. So here's our take on the dollars and cents of the issue, or rather nonsense of the issue. The total fiscal year 2025 request for VA was a 9.8% increase from the 2024 budget. 9.8% is far more than the rate of inflation. The VA spent $301 billion in fiscal year 2023, which is a 70% increase from fiscal year 2013, when the VA spent $180 billion. A 70% increase over 10 years and no material results to the issues plaguing the department and our veterans. Veterans are routinely told they cannot receive an appointment for a non-life-threatening issue for 3 to 6 months. So let's forget about all the negatives associated with VA healthcare for a moment and focus on our concept to eliminate the Department of VA's function as a healthcare provider and let our veterans receive care at any private or public medical facility of their choice nationwide. In layman's terms, it means that the insurance company pays 100% of medical costs after the veteran has paid $6,000. However, considering that the veteran has received a $5,000 debit card to pay the first $5,000 of the deductible, that means once the veteran has used up their debit card, the most that veteran would have to pay is $1,000 per year, i.e. topping off the $6,000 deductible. It's easy to see this DOGE idea would be way more effective than the current system, preventing fraud and providing the veteran with unprecedented care, and for less money.
Hello and welcome to another one of Kiss My Tech's totally unique out-of-the-box solution ideas for government effectiveness, which naturally includes efficiency. This idea centers around taking care of the soldiers that took care of us, all while saving the taxpayers money. For this solution idea, it was all about collaboration. We had some ideas about doging for the veterans, but we'd never served in the military. So we reached out to the veteran on our team. And I have to say on this one, he out-doged us. Then we brought in an expert on insurance and employee benefits to put the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae. Of course, we just had to add our 2 cents worth to his idea to make it the most it could be. So this really was a team effort. Now, here's Anthony to present his totally unique out-of-the-box DOGE, which is to revolutionize VA healthcare and eliminate that function from the Department of Veteran Affairs.
Now, before you freak out and say, what? How can I as a veteran not care about other veterans? Don't get me wrong, I do care very much. And I believe this idea would vastly benefit veterans in a multitude of ways and at the same time eliminate government waste. Again, when I say I of course mean the entire team at Kiss My Tech. We already know DOGE is focused on the trillions of dollars of federal government fraud, waste, and corruption. But perhaps this one wasn't on their radar. Before we doze right in, let's clarify the problems we are addressing with this idea. We always hear complaints in the media from veterans and comments from politicians on both sides of the aisle about the shortcomings of the VA department. Everyone thinks they have the know-how to make it better. Meanwhile, we all see veterans suffering. Somehow neither political party nor any recent administration seems to have been able to make any real progress over the last 20 years to resolve the issues plaguing the VA. We just continue to throw more money at the problem each year. But what is it really doing? Now let's take a more detailed look into the structure and problems with the VA and a brief rundown of how VA healthcare works, because soldiers still have a challenge getting healthcare. And when they do, it is often inferior, not to mention the scores of soldiers that end up sleeping on the street, mired by mental health issues that often result in drug addictions, which often go untreated or improperly treated. Before we get into the money issues, let's speak to the structure and complicated process of veterans receiving their benefits. VA healthcare covers many veterans for life, yes, but it's an extremely complicated system that puts our veterans into a category or priority group. There are 8 Yes, 8 priority groups. When each soldier leaves the military, they are given an assessment of the percentage of disability that resulted from their time in service. Many soldiers leave the military with a 0% disability, but then many soldiers have varying percentages of disability up to 100%. This includes assessment factors in both physical and mental health. Based on that percentage and their pay grade while they were serving in the military, this dictates what level of care the Veterans Administration will pay for and for how long. The priority group the veteran is placed in determines exactly what benefits they receive and what copay is required, if any. If the soldier has a 10% or higher disability, the veteran typically doesn't have to pay for anything. Now, adding to the complication of benefit amount and disability percentages are a litany of other factors, such as where did the veteran serve the most time? In which theater of conflict did they serve? What was their job when they served? The list goes on and on. Now, once the veteran goes through an exorbitantly long screening and paperwork process, the result is typically the same. The veteran is officially enrolled in the VA and receives their benefits. Why is the process so long, you might ask? Why is there so much paperwork? Why all the red tape, for lack of a better term? Not unlike many other of our government agencies and entities, the VA has grown and grown. They increasingly ask for large percentages of additional monies each year and are influenced by lobby groups and private sector equipment and supply companies. Bureaucracy at its finest, if you will. Even though the VA is a government department, it has grown so large, you can liken it to a private hospital organization at this point. Even with all the hassles and complicated categories in the system, they actually never want to determine you won't be covered. They never want to say a treatment or veteran isn't covered because it's the equivalent of losing a patient or customer. And of course, the more patients or customers they keep in the system, they can continue to ask for more money each year, and the cycle of issues only become larger and larger. And the ones who ultimately lose out are the veterans themselves. Okay, now the money. So here's our take on the dollars and cents of the issue, or rather nonsense of the issue. The total fiscal year 2025 request for VA was a 9.8% increase from the 2024 budget. 9.8% is far more than the rate of inflation. The VA spent $301 billion in fiscal year 2023, which is a 70% increase from fiscal year 2013, when the VA spent $180 billion. A 70% increase over 10 years and no material results to the issues plaguing the department and our veterans. There are approximately 9.1 million veterans enrolled in the VA healthcare program. Of the total VA budget, roughly 42% is allocated towards healthcare. That number for fiscal year 2025 would be approximately $134 billion. That $134 billion is allocated to provide healthcare across 9.1 million veterans enrolled. The math on that is $14,725 per year per veteran spent on healthcare. In 2023, the average U.S. citizen spent $14,570 per year on healthcare in the private sector, roughly the same. In July 2024, the VA warned Congress of a potential $15 billion budget shortfall. So what that means is either someone has been dipping into the cookie jar, or it's quite a big accounting error. Either way, it's just not acceptable for our soldiers, seamen, airmen, and Marines not to have proper medical care and to have also misplaced $15 billion. Money that could be helping our veterans. That cannot continue. The VA is routinely the 5th largest federal agency spender. This is most certainly a department that needs to have some DOGE thrown its way. Out of 18 million veterans currently in the United States, only 9.1 million are actively enrolled in the VA healthcare system. So that means that the other 50% are likely to receive health benefits through the private sector. Many veterans go on to second and third careers after leaving military service, careers that provide them with health benefits. However, some veterans don't reach out for help when they need it most, so they slip through the cracks in the system. So in this DOGE, we are focused on getting effective and efficient care for those veterans that need it most. Simply put, the 2 main issues facing veterans is the quality and timeliness of care that they receive and the inconvenience. Veterans are routinely told they cannot receive an appointment for a non-life-threatening issue for 3 to 6 months. And when they do finally get their appointment, they might have to travel 60 to 100 miles to the closest VA facility from them. It's just not practical or efficient. So let's forget about all the negatives associated with VA healthcare for a moment and focus on our concept to eliminate the Department of VA's function as a healthcare provider and let our veterans receive care at any private or public medical facility of their choice nationwide. Now let's get into the process and practicality of this concept. Trump always says everything is a negotiation, and this one would be huge. Through a VA dedicated app, they could access a list of approved medical professionals, support groups, and other resources. Of course, they could do their own online research, check the reviews, and choose the resource that best meets their needs, then make the necessary appointment. But how could this be done better and cheaper, you ask? Having discussed this problem with one of the top insurance consultants in the United States, we've come up with a cutting-edge approach for this DOGE. I know, you're thinking cutting-edge insurance. Don't make me yawn. But hold on a second. You may be surprised. Let's run down the plan. Each soldier would have their own uniquely structured private healthcare insurance, and here's what that would look like. The VA would negotiate deals with several insurance companies across the country to obtain the best rates, not just relying on one traditional insurance carrier. That way they can get the best prices across the board, forcing insurance companies to stay competitive with their rates and coverage. Otherwise, the insurance provider loses their contract with the government. It would also be the insurance provider's responsibility to make sure magic happens behind the scenes. Those insurance providers, as standard practice, negotiate very favorable fees and costs with doctors and hospitals, which is the first step in lowering costs. The key to this DOGE plan is that those policies would have low monthly premiums paid by the government, because these policies would require the veteran to pay high deductibles and have high copays. Remember, simply put, a deductible is the amount of money that the veteran would have to pay out of his or her own pocket before their insurance policy would pay the rest of covered expenses. Now try to resist your urge to freak out until you hear the whole plan. I know this sounds bad for the veteran, but don't worry, it's actually much better for the veteran. I'm going to explain. We are taking the money we would save on high insurance premiums and giving each soldier a debit card with up to $5,000 to cover most, if not all, of their deductibles and copays for the year. On average across the board, it is more likely healthy soldiers would receive a $2,000 to $3,000 a year debit card. This would leave money in the budget to provide extra care for the soldiers that need it most. An example of how this works is very straightforward. The veteran goes to a doctor, and the insurance provider charges a $75 copay for an office visit and a $100 copay for tests ordered by the doctor. However, all the veteran would need to do is pay with his preloaded debit card for those costs, and therefore they would pay nothing out of their own pockets. Now there is one small hitch. For those veterans with less than a 10% disability, along with the maximum $5,000 debit card, the medical plan itself would have a $6,000 maximum out-of-pocket cost to the veteran. In layman's terms, it means that the insurance company pays 100% of medical costs after the veteran has paid $6,000. However, considering that the veteran has received a $5,000 debit card to pay the first $5,000 of the deductible, that means once the veteran has used up their debit card, the most that veteran would have to pay is $1,000 per year, i.e. topping off the $6,000 deductible. So once again, out of the $6,000 deductible, the soldier pays the last $1,000 of the deductible out of pocket, not the first $1,000. And this situation would only be relevant for soldiers that develop a serious condition after leaving the military that resulted in the need for a high frequency of doctor visits. Most veterans would not spend that much in any given year, but for the few veterans that end up developing a serious condition after leaving the military that was not directly related to their service, only having to pay the $1,000, it is fair price for better coverage, accessible healthcare, and only having to travel a short distance for that care. Now for the veterans who have more than a 10% disability, that also fall into the lower earnings categories, the last $1,000 of that deductible would most likely be waived, meaning the veteran would be paying nothing. To summarize, not 100% of all veterans would receive $5,000 on a debit card. There would be a sliding scale based on several factors, including length of time in the service, amount of disability, current income, and their ability to obtain private insurance. This would limit or remove coverage for those veterans who have left the service for a high-paying job and those who have access to low-cost medical insurance through a current employer. Thus, money would still be available in the budget to provide the high-cost treatment necessary to care to those that received serious physical and/or mental injuries as a result of their service. But what makes this DOGE idea possible is having what is commonly called a MERP wrapped around the insurance policy. So what is a MERP, you're probably asking? Well, a MERP is a medical expense reimbursement plan. In simple terms, this means that a third-party company would be contracted to work with the designated medical insurance provider to oversee and administer the medical services for the veterans, i.e. the debit cards, in conjunction with their base coverage. The MERP company would also oversee issuing each veteran their preloaded debit card. You know, the card veterans would use for paying their deductibles, copays, and other approved expenses allowed under the policy issued by the insurance provider. However, the MERP's other main job is to make sure there are checks and balances for the handling of the debit card expenses. Their system ensures that the right entities are being paid for the right things by auditing all the bills. The MERP company examines every expense to make sure that, one, the bill is being paid to a doctor and not the local furniture store, and secondly, that it was for a covered expense under the medical plan and not a Brazilian butt lift or any other form of unnecessary treatment such as cosmetic surgery or hair transplants. So in essence, two different companies, the insurance provider and the MERP company, have a vested interest in managing costs and avoiding unapproved expenses or, dare we say, fraud. It's easy to see this DOGE idea would be way more effective than the current system, preventing fraud and providing the veteran with unprecedented care, and for less money. We all know there is no such thing as a free lunch, and this still must be paid for. Based on our calculations, the cost of medical insurance plus giving every covered veteran a prepaid debit card with $5,000 would be less than the VA is currently paying for medical costs. We estimate the savings of transferring VA healthcare to the private sector would be upwards of $30 billion per year. This would also save money on overall VA administration costs and all the costs associated with dedicated healthcare facilities. Not that saving dollars on administrative cost wasn't enough. There are other adjustments that we are proposing to be made. For instance, closing the VA medical facilities would save an average of $2 billion annually in maintenance costs alone. This would be in addition to having the option to utilize those existing facilities for other positive things, such as temporary housing for the homeless, or leasing them out to the private sector, which would generate free money into the Treasury.
Wow, Anthony, thank you. That was informative for all of us here on the Kiss My Tech team, and hopefully to all of you watching from afar. Now that you've heard the top level of this pitch, please give us your constructive feedback in the comments section, and don't forget to kiss my tech.